Well, he's big boy, the biggest boy. He's a big boy, the biggest boy. He's a big boy, the biggest boy. Sorry, had to. Yeah, today we're going to be talking about Cell Max. Hey folks, MasakoX here. Now, aside from the rather flamboyant nature of today's discussion video, we have some genuinely compelling thoughts for this outing, with Dragon Ball Super Superhero now being around for a fair while and Toei not really caring about spoilers, and it's coming out today for those in the West. We've decided to take some time and talk about its final boss, the infamous Cell Max, this generation's Hirudegarn or Fire Broly, or whatever kaiju monster that comes to mind. Yes, the very new iteration of Cell, which has generated a rather fair bit of speculation and derision amongst some circles of the community. We can now see him in all his green and red glory, thanks to this official art from Toriyama, one of the original bits of concept art for the film itself. And it is still sad to see Gamma 2 like that. Why did he have to go, man? He was cool. While a lot of people thought that Cell or Cell-like creatures could be in the Dragon Ball movie, considering its Red Ribbon Army being the baddies, not many Dragon Ball fans actually expected him to look like that, XL-sized and very Garudeon-like, and not in his perfect form. People were surprised to see this instead, an ode to semi-perfect Cell, who was in fact Toriyama's favourite design of Cell, I'll have you know. Maybe that's why. Now, with the internet being what it is, we also heard voices of lamentation that, oh, we had been robbed, that we hadn't got the form of Cell that people had been yearning for years. Those were expecting a more fitting tribute to the likes of Mr. Perfect Cell and his mighty jawline, expecting him to be appearing in the movie proper. But instead, we got someone who has about as much personality as Broly when he showed up in Second Coming. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, basically in the second movie, Broly's Second Coming, Broly's just gone mad. He's got no personality at all, even less so than in the first one. Okay, so what is the point of this video, Masako? Well, the purpose of this video is to talk about why, despite not being as charismatic or as eccentric as Mr. Perfect Cell, or even his semi-perfect self for that matter, Cell Max does fulfill his purpose for this movie, and why reintroducing the original Perfect Cell into the Dragon Ball movie timeline wouldn't have been such a great idea in the long run. At least not in this movie. There are many things to consider here which we hope can assure you that this choice of the final big bad was the best choice, as well as the right one. While we do see Cell Max sleeping before the third act of the movie, we are braced for impact. He is introduced to us properly in about the last third of the picture, when Magenta is basically getting impatient and decides to awaken him early, despite being told not to, since he isn't ready yet. His mind hasn't fully developed to harness all of this power properly. And disrupting this procedure could indeed jeopardize not only the headquarters, but also the Earth itself, since Cell Max is being drip-fed energy from the Earth's core. That's pretty metal. But since when did Red Ribbon leaders like to listen to reason and their underlings, yeah? It's important for the record too, that Dr. Hedo is opposed to the idea of using this, setting him free, for various reasons. Not only to do with it being bad for the planet, also, he doesn't really like Jiro's legacy, he wants to be different. But he still made it! And much like those scientists that used to work at Jurassic Park, just because you can create a powerful being that is powered by the Earth's core, doesn't mean that you should. Yes, Hedo likes to show off, but he doesn't want to hurt anyone. He just likes to make things because he can. The Doctor was actually reluctant to let Cell Max out, due to his strong belief that this creation was simply unnecessary, but he was told to make it. The Gammas were heroic enough and strong enough in which to do the job that they were tasked to do, which was to stop or impede the likes of Gohan. Besides, Hedo is nothing like his grandfather Jiro, and he wasn't overly thrilled about reusing parts of his grandfather's tech. If you've seen this movie, you can immediately tell that whilst Hedo is still quite arrogant and aware of his own ability, he is not nearly as cantankerous, self-important and mad as his grandfather Jiro, despite being related to him. He shares the brilliant mind of Jiro, but not the ambition to better humanity via questionable practices. He's a scientist, not a mad scientist. Again, Magenta let this monstrosity out, not Hedo. And by doing so, this caused the resulting Hulk to be little more than a mindless kaiju. he wasn't fully finished, and that meant that he didn't have the mind of the old Cell. Instead, it was the base concept of Cell. Maybe like imperfect Cell based on instinct, but even less. Just running on said instinct and base programming. Think like a literal Cell. Cell Max is an interesting concept though, with them being both an upgrade to Cell and a downgrade from the original Cell, lacking the regeneration and absorption powers of the old model, but also being more powerful in the long run still. It was a trade-off. You have more power, but you can't regenerate or absorb people. Hedo took what Jiro made and, in theory, made it better. Again, in theory. We will never know how effective Cell Max could have been when taken to term and his mind fully developed. But if Gohan's musing about him being trouble even for Goku and Vegeta were accurate when we did see him fight in that state, I think this would have been trouble for all, even Broly. Another thing that differentiates Hedo from his grandpappy is that he was smart enough to build some sort of safety measure into the being, in case this situation came up. He placed an activation switch for his, toned down when compared to the original Cell, self-destruct mechanism. Instead of being a simple device that you could hold, like the one that Jiro had, it's placed within the crown of Cell Max. But this begs the question, would the movie have benefited if this was an upgraded version of Perfect Cell, instead of Cell Max that we got? Or maybe we could have had something akin to Cell X from Super Dragon Ball Heroes, a complete departure from convention and something entirely more like a bug, completely bonkers. Well, we'll talk more about that option later. But for now, let's stick to the base Cell. First, you would have to do two things to make the original Perfect Cell work as the main antagonist, and it would be to the detriment of Superhero. Either you introduce him in Act 3 and undersell his original arc. Yeah, we are aware that the character just showing up to fight Gohan at the end would be underwhelming. I mean, you have tons of video games that already do that. Or you can add him into the action earlier at the halfway mark or so, which does have the downside of taking some time away from some of the characters in the movie, which might not work for its benefit, as the new cast is fun and the old group get a lot of time to shine, which would then restore the complaint of the Earthlings not doing anything useful in stories or being helpful. And here's the third additional thing that we'd like to point out. We don't think we need Perfect Cell to return. Not really. Even though we like Perfect Cell a lot, it means that we care. Cell returning for a Frieza-like outing might do more harm than good. Here's why. Now, of course, whenever this topic comes up, we naturally see people using Resurrection F as the main reason as why we should get a Resurrection C. If Frieza could have a movie that focused on him returning to the main timeline in some way, then surely the likes of Cell could have the same treatment going forward. But wait, is that what we really want, Sovereign? We've said this many times now, but looking back on this, from a modern day perspective, Frieza's original return in Resurrection F kinda sucked. Not the Maximum the Hormone song, F, no, that was cool. That remains awesome. In truth, that movie has aged very badly. Battle of Gods has withstood the rigors of time, whereas Resurrection F has not, and Battle of Gods was 2 years older. I never want to see Resurrection F again, as it's very boring in hindsight. It didn't accomplish anything interesting. It was just a glorified battle. And Frieza then had to return for a second time later on in the Tournament of Power, being used in a different way, just to reinvent himself properly. And I will say, they actually managed to pull it off that second time going. In short, Resurrection F was a failure in bringing back its own title character in a compelling way. The anime had to go ahead and redo it, and admittedly, again, they succeeded, despite an initial blowback. Kudos to that. Now, when it comes to Superhero, it's a love letter to the franchise, trying to marry the likes of Dragon Ball Z, and Dragon Ball Super into a cohesive product. What GT tried to do, but actually working, by mixing a lot of elements together from all three series. That isn't it though. It's also a love letter to other movies too, within the franchise. Cell Max is a cheeky reference to Garudeon, probably one of the best movie villains entirely, but also to Bio Broly, just done right. I mean, come on. You've got 18, Krillin, Goten and Trunks fighting this guy like they fought Bio Broly. Not only that, but he's based on Toriyama's favourite cell form, which might have been his own demand. Or maybe it could be the director Tetsuro Kodama's way of honouring the author's beloved and slightly underused transformation of the big original villain Bugman. He is basically a gigantic version of this form of Cell with some smaller changes, like a more red-like coloration, a different shade of red mind you, a club on the tail, and those pumped up kicks, you better run, outrun my sorry, I apologise for this many music jokes in the script. But for those asking why the red tint, well, it's obvious. Magenta had stated that the being known as Cell was the greatest creation that any Red Ribbon employee had ever made. Magenta idolised Cell, and thusly, when he got the chance to make another version, he changed the coloration from mostly green to mostly red, to fully represent the Red Ribbon Army, and to distinguish it as his version, superior to Jiro's. In short, Cell Max could be described as a power trip of Magentas, if you want to put it that way. Anyway, Cell Max didn't have a personality because, in truth, he didn't need one. He, just like any good kaiju, is more like a natural disaster, rather than an opponent that you can take on in a one-on-one battle, you know, punchy. Which was cool, and allowed more characters to do stuff to go up against a typical natural disaster. When was the last time that a tornado or an earthquake gave you a monologue? Again, we remind you all about Krillin, how he was actually able to do some damage against him. Granted, it wasn't enough to take Cell Max down, but if you want to, you could say that Krillin had the assist alongside Piccolo. Even Fat Gotenks could be considered as having meaningfully assisted, having also actually done some damage to Cell Max. And he also took the synthetic life of Gamma 2, being one of the few movie villains that actually cost a character their life. In this case, permanently, very much like his predecessor. Tell me, how many movie villains share that feat, And yes, he's not really a villain, but we think he worked perfectly, pun definitely intended, in this scenario that he was put in. Instead of retreading Perfect Cell again, with a threat of this outing being as bad as Frieza's original return, we got someone inspired by him, but not a carbon copy of him. Perfect Cell's legacy is secure, with a set inspiration and inferiority in terms of personality which was being established in the movie's story. A fresh take, you could say, that allowed us to have a triumphant return of Giant Piccolo and of course Gohan's new transformation, Gohan Beast. But not only that, an enemy this massive allowed everyone to take a bite out of him, which I feel created a really unique final battle. So, overall, we are fans of this giant-sized Bugman. And hey, with Dr. Hedo around, maybe we could have some more android shenanigans. Who knows? Okay, I talked about it. What about Cell X? Why couldn't we have that? Well, that would have been hard to explain. After all, the time breakers don't exist in this timeline. You would have to completely change the backstory of Cell X to fit the likes of the Red Ribbon Army. And while Cell X does look like an intimidating and bonkers kaiju-like beast, like Cell Max, it doesn't really sit well with those who may not know about Super Dragon Ball heroes. How does this fit with Cell at all? Why have multiple legs? It doesn't really relate to the original archetype. Cell X was created by beings who had little connection to the Red Ribbon Army, or any inclination to evolve Cell in a way befitting his stature and legacy. But instead, they just made him a big hulking bug, not a hulking Bugman. It would have been too jarring, complicated, and besides, Toriyama most likely doesn't even know what Cell X is. Why would he even care in using it? One last thing, and this is quite important. The very fact that people are even getting in a flap about Cell Max means that the movie has done its job, to get people's eyes on it. After all, the whole point of a movie is to tell a story, get bums on seats, and get people talking. By lamenting about Cell Max and why it upsets you so, you've basically provided free advertising. You might have actually encouraged people that might not have been bothered to see the movie to actually go and see the movie. Ultimately, that is what Superhero hopes to do, to get people to see it. And if it involves Cell Max being the final boss, then so be it. Be honest with me. Would you have wanted just a generic robot showing up, like a Gamma Zero being the final boss? Not necessarily, as it might not have carried so much import with you. Cell Max at least has some kind of connection to the past. Magenta choosing for Cell to be honoured by becoming the greatest deterrent that they ever had. Gamma 1 and 2 were good to get the initial job done, but the real crown jewels was Cell Max, a tribute to the old army's strongest asset. It fits perfectly with the goals of the new iteration of said organisation. Or at least it did before it got completely destroyed when Gohan and Piccolo showed up. At the end of the day, Frieza got his third chance. Could Cell get his eventually? We ask you though, should he get it? or should Super concentrate on original characters going forward? Leave a comment below, and let's get this discussion going. And I will see you in the next video. Catch you later!